part of the city. So I hope you get home. Okay, now I'm going to be extemporaneous at times, but I'm going to also share some insights from a text that I prepared. But I want to say beforehand that there are three people that I want to acknowledge off the top, especially if this is going to be recorded. I want to acknowledge three friends of mine for providing me with some material that I'll be using today. One is Susan Cyril Giroux and Henry Giroux and Michael Neary. So I'll be citing their work a lot throughout this talk, and so I just wanted to make sure that that I gave them the credit that they deserve. Now, I'm going to start out just with a couple of comments about neoliberalism, neoliberal capitalism, and then I'm going to move to the school-to-prison pipeline, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the response of the university, or the non-response of the university, to the school-to-prison pipeline. I might even mention the teacher-to-prison pipeline. After Atlanta and seeing those teachers in shackles being taken away and given, I understand some of the administrators were given 20-year sentences. I'm not sure. Some were given 1 to 2, 3 years. And so we're seeing the beginning of the teacher-to-prison pipeline in that respect. Then I'm going to shift gears, and I'm going to talk about higher education in the university. And then at the final part of my talk will be about the knowledge liberation front in some movement, EduFactory, and some movements that are occurring inside and outside the academy to struggle to reclaim the university as a democratic public sphere or as a counter-public sphere. So that's basically where I'm going to move. So I've got a lot of material. I may have to speak rather quickly in order to cover it all, so please bear with me. The field of educational reform. Can you hear me okay? Okay. The field of educational reform. I might even just hold this, if I can. Elvis has just left the building. I always like to say that. The field of educational reform has been overgrazed, emerging as a multitude of conflicting opinions. Opinions varying according to the disposition of the reformer and the facts he or she has selected. The topsoil has worn thin as the sun withers and scorches seeds without roots. It's time to enrich the soil of our educational reform if we are once again to grow roots. Until now, the socialist imaginary has lain buried deep within our pedagogical unconscious, awaiting this historic moment to be revealed once again. We can begin by affirming our commitment to a communal self, one that implies a continuum between mind and spirit. We must fight for the free expression of our productive capacities and the free association with other workers in productive works. We need to learn how we can use our labor capacity outside and beyond capitalist production relations. That is what critical pedagogy in university reform is all about, in my opinion. My goal over the years has been to develop transnational interactions from below, from the exploited and the excluded. And this may be called a counter-hegemonic globalization process if you want. These are local struggles that need to be globalized, and we know what they are. Boaventura de Sousa Santos has listed some of these as transnational solidarity networks, a new labor internationalism, international networks of alternative legal aid, transnational human rights organizations, feminist movements, indigenous movements, ecological movements, alternative development movements, and associations literary, artistic, and scientific movements on the periphery of a world system in search for non-imperialist, anti-hegemonic cultural and educational values. Critical pedagogy, by the way, critical pedagogy is the term pedagogy you could just use it as a short form for education. My mentor was Paulo Freire. Some of you may know Paulo Freire. If you don't, he wrote a book, many books. How many know Freire? I'm just curious. Okay, you know Paulo Freire. All right. Was Freire. So I hope you're going to see some of Freire in this talk today. Critical pedagogy needs to become activated through new social movements. The movements that I've witnessed of late, the Occupy movements, the uprising in Greece, protests of university students in DF in Mexico, the Indignados in Spain, are making more than minor demands. They're struggling for an entirely different kind of future, and the originality and creativity of their protests speak to that future. They're not just about negating the present, but also about reclaiming space, parks, public squares, university buildings, and other spaces where they can enact a more horizontal form of governance and decision-making. They're moving beyond narrow sectarian interests and seeking to put participatory democracy into practice as an alternative to vertical forms of organization favored by liberal representative democracy. And of course, they're fighting state authoritarianism and a growing transnational fascism. They're seeking to challenge consumer citizens to become critical citizens once again, as many citizens strove to become before today's era of what we know now as asset capitalism, or neoliberal capitalism, or crony capitalism, or casino capitalism, or financialization. But the movement goes beyond nostalgia for the past, since most of the youth have known only neoliberal capitalism all of their lives. The youth have also figured out that parliamentary forms of representation can no longer suffice in creating democracy in a social universe of asset or finance capitalism. Youth protesters today are struggling for participatory forms of association, using new social media and new convergent media production as digital tools, as technological literacies to educate themselves and their comrades, to link their experiences of struggle to more goal-directed actions. They're struggling for different forms of social life. And here, the digital media do not become ends in themselves, but simply, or maybe not simply is an appropriate adjective, but augment or supplement real-world experiences of struggle for popular sovereignty. And in the case of, for instance, the Zapatistas in Chiapas, or recently a community I visited in Chirán, Mexico, in Michoacán, the Purepecha community, who are creating the autodefensas. Maybe you've heard about that. As a result of these struggles, these tools become more integrated as part of an effort to create a collective intelligence with multiple visions of a socially just, fairer world. So the educational left needs to be more proactive in helping to transform such movements from spontaneous uprisings to historical blocks in the Gramscian sense. That said, I do believe there's an ongoing danger of communitarian popular fronts, but I don't want to wax too political right now about that. Following Paulo Freire's pedagogically impassioned argument that freedom and education should never be separated, we cannot simply ride the crest of some cosmogenic wave, merely going along for the ride. The winding sheet of humanity serving somehow as our topsail. We cannot afford to rest our hope on the appearance of some galactic supernova of the soul, some parabolic flow into and out of historical time, as if merely a spectator in some arcane sideshow. We must liberate ourselves from the liberal indecisiveness that prevents us from escaping a sullied world. We must forge a vision on the anvil of class struggle, of revolutionary transformation through a self-giving, interabiding collectivity of self-community, grounded in an ethics of solidarity and love. We, as historical agents, are inseparable from the motion of praxis, entrusted to socialism and socialist democracy, but pluriversal in scope, so that the battle that I want to talk about today is multi-pronged and coordinated within numerous interconnected struggles. One such struggle, while never independent from the struggle against capital, is the struggle over the production of knowledge and the meaning and purpose of teaching. In other words, the struggle over education. And I have an institute Institute of McLaren in Ensenada. It's an institute that brings in teachers under the umbrella of Educación Popular, popular education. Popular education, as I see it, is a tree that throughout history has found its way to burst through the blood-soaked pitch of the battlefield, its roots firmly planted in the restitution of our planetary soul, its leaves finding shafts of sunlight slashing their way through the carnage. Now, what is the carnage? What creates the carnage? I just want to give you my definition of neoliberal capitalism, if I could. Now today, but let me. So it might take me a couple of sentences to do that. But today's unregulated casino-style or speculative capitalism creates laissez-faire economic conditions by means of unfettering the economy, freeing it up by removing barriers and restrictions to what entrepreneurs and corporate or business actors can accomplish in order to maximize profits. That much is pretty clear. Politicians often refer to this as broadening the tax base by reforming the tax law. They refer to it as limiting protectionism, removing fixed exchange rates, privatizing state-run businesses, and deregulating the economy. But a more comprehensive description of neoliberalism would include, in my mind, the idea that neoliberalism is a total, universal form of social organization bolstered by a total life philosophy based on the ideal of competition and the marketization of everyday life. Capitalist logistics and capitalist mechanisms of control. So it's really, at least in my mind, it's a total life world. It's almost like a cosmovision of capital. Now, universities, as Mike Neary asserts, should be filled with progressive intellectuals who declare the commitment, and I'm not just talking about professors as intellectuals, I'm talking about students as intellectuals, who declare their commitment to progressive social transformation and transforming the social relations of neoliberal capitalist society in the rationality of managerialism, rather than building a hidden curriculum that reproduces capitalist illusions and student-professor collaborators in the exploitation of human labor. Here, students are invited to be made the subject rather than the object of learning. There needs to be a focus on how university work is produced, and I want to get back to that in a moment. And now I want to cut in to the school-to-prison pipeline, briefly. And again, I'm indebted to Susan Searles-Giroux for some of the material that she sent me so that I could prepare for this talk, and also her partner, Henry Giroux. So let's look at, I just want to begin by looking at the passage of the so-called Black Codes in the years right after Reconstruction. Now, these codes facilitate